Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the Virtual CISO Moment. Stanley Charles joins us today. He is the Senior Manager for Information Security and Compliance at Pixel United. He is also the founder of the Charles Technology Group. Stanley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Would love to hear your story, how you got into this wonderful world of cyber. And I have to pause because there's a reason why I'm wearing the Air Force hat, and I imagine that you're probably going to touch on that reason. So why don't you go ahead and get started? How did you get started in this wonderful world?
Well, really, it started at a very early age. As soon as, the PC became a mainstream item for households, right? We had one. I would play pinball, all the little games that you had on there, Minesweeper. And around high school, they would start doing these career assessments that would kind of help you find what you'd most likely excel at. And it always came back something computer related. Originally, I went to the Air Force under aircraft structural maintenance, right? And although I loved it, it was not like my passion, right? I'm not very, I was good at it, but I had to work to be good at it. But naturally, I always wanted to get into the kind of computer related field. I didn't really know what. And I had the chance while I was at Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany to become, as a part-time job, the IT asset manager for my squadron. And so once I took on that role, it helped me get a little bit more familiar with some of the ins and outs of kind of tech. It was my first introduction to tech. And then when I decided to get out of active duty out of Germany, I came to Hill Air Force Base and joined the Guard unit out here shortly after. So it was the 109th Air Control Squadron, where my school was out of Biloxi, Mississippi, and I went all in, all things technology. So it was military trained. Excellent schools, excellent curriculum, and it really gave me a jump start on understanding a lot of the different fields and verticals that you could experience in IT. So basically started out in network engineering, but in military terms, that's really a lot of things, like a lot of proprietary things like encryption, multiplexing, things like that. So took that skill set and decided to become a network engineer as a civilian, and from there I kind of just let the universe drag me wherever it needed me to be.
I love the way that you said that, and we have some parallels here. So when you were in the Air Force, you were in aircraft maintenance, and not many people know this. A lot of people know that I was a prior Air Force, but my job was I was C-130 crew chief. So you guys performed the long-term maintenance. We dragged the plane into the hangar, and it would sit there for a few months. You'd be tearing engines off and props off and panels off, and I'm always wondering how they're going to put that back together. But some way you guys always did. And then actually my introduction into everything cybersecurity was through networking. I like to tell people that I grew up in networking, like you. And I actually say that I was dragged into it. You said something similar, but I was dragged into it kicking and screaming, because who is responsible for the firewall, the first firewall in your organization? It's usually the networking people. Hey, Greg, you want to do this? So I don't know about you, but was there a time in your career when you realized that you were spending more time, instead of getting people to talk to each other like you do in networking, but you were spending more time to get people not to talk to each other? Did you have that moment of epiphany?
Well, I had I don't know if it was fortunate or unfortunate circumstance of working at companies that didn't have large tech teams, right? So for me, it was really hired to do networking, but in the sense of like routers, switches, right? New data centers being brought up. Canon USA was establishing a new office in Salt Lake City at the time. And so I really turned down another job that was higher paying to get the like ground up experience with building out a data center from scratch, right? So every drop, every Ethernet cable that had to be at a certain cubicle, I wanted to see it all, right? So I actually took a lower paying job to do the rack and stack configuration, BGP, OSPF, all that stuff back then. But no, I mean, it was such a small shop, I actually got into security without realizing it, because when there was nothing to do, I was helping to patch and identify vulnerabilities on workstations and stuff like that. So it forced me into a lot of different fields. But I never gave myself the credit for it until much later.
I understand that. I still see that as sort of like being you were dragged into it. You just didn't realize it at the time,
Yes.
like it was, almost covert. But that's a very important point that you made, though, as well. Kind of a side point that a lot of times one of the reasons why I like talking about someone else's career path is because sometimes it helps folks in their career path to make decisions. And you said something very important, and I did this with one position change as well. You took a position that you thought was better in the long term for your career, even though it paid less. And I'm assuming
Much
that
less.
worked out very well for you.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's and so my advice that I would say to folks who are maybe earlier in their career field watching or listening to this is like salary is not the ultimate determinant. Think about where it is that you're going. And certainly with regards to cybersecurity, you really need to have a fundamental understanding of some IT concepts, and networking is a huge one of them. So to your point about understanding everything with physical security and physical networking, like you said, the Ethernet drops, that's a huge physical security issue. If you have drops that are exposed to the public that someone can plug into, for example, if you don't understand the basics of how that even looks, and you just saw that in a book, it's not going to sit too well with you.
My advice, honestly, to people that are looking to get into the field is to really, it's a patient game. It's easy to chase the dollars, but for the people that are really, really passionate about this, right? The money is not you that you couldn't pay someone uh, that is not in love with this field to stay, truthfully, and have them be a high performer, in my opinion. The burnout for someone who's passionate, my superpower is my burnout threshold is tenfold because I love it so much, right? So I prefer to run hot. And honestly, I learned that about myself. That I'd rather have a lot of tasks to do because that's a lot of opportunities to learn. So getting into the field for without understanding the journey, it's really about the journey. Cyber was a 5-year plan for me. I thought I wasn't gonna ever be good enough to really do it because I thought you need to be an expert by the time you landed in a cyber role, and that's not true. But you do need to have fundamental knowledge of a good fundamental understanding of the different areas of IT
Oh,
because you're gonna ride concepts for the rest of your career, right? Technology changes it's too specific to really become an expert at one thing. The concept keeps you relevant.
well, I will often say that, sometimes if someone calls himself a cybersecurity expert, I'm like, no, you're not. There's
Yeah,
no such thing. Yeah, and people have called me a cybersecurity expert. And I mean, if it's like an interview or something, I'm not going to correct the interviewer and say, well,
right.
no, let me explain why. But in general, it's just like, no, nobody can be an expert in the field. And even within their individual disciplines, to your point, it keeps on changing. Good advice, enjoy the journey, because I look back, I've been doing this for 34 years, and my journey has just been a lot of fun, and
Right.
it's not over yet. But if you spend your entire journey banging up against doing things that you really don't have a passion for, you're not going to have a very fulfilling life, I don't think, with that. Um, from your perspective, and again, I love it because we have in some ways similar perspectives. From your perspective, what do you think like today is one of the most significant threats to small and mid-sized businesses, information security?
So that one's, I think I have a kind of a multi-dimensional answer on that one.
Okay.
The first one might surprise some people, but really, when I think of the threats that are facing SMBs, one of the biggest threats I've seen in my experience of consulting and kind of in advisory roles is some MSPs and IT service providers. Sometimes, if they find the right company, it can become a predatory kind of relationship. And what I mean by that, here is why I rank that above cyber threat, right? The bad guys, everyone knows, right? Every industry has that government presence that warns them and sends them feeds and emails about threats that are related to their business, right? But what happens when the small to mid-sized business is paying, tens of thousands or, maybe 10,000, $8,000 to $10,000 a month to a service provider? that is doing absolutely nothing for them, but they're not skilled enough to identify that as a gap, right? So that to me is a bigger problem. Bad actors, everyone knows that's coming. No one talks about some of the smaller companies that have to rely, they don't have a strong IT presence, they outsource it, right, to the experts, right? There's no one in the company that really knows how to hold an MSP accountable for what they're doing right or not doing to serve the company. So
Yeah.
I found a lot of situations where companies have gotten themselves into 3-year contracts and they haven't gotten a whole lot out of the MSP. It's just been wasted money.
And you have touched upon a soapbox issue for me. So excuse me while I stand up on my soapbox. And that is, now, first of all, I'm going to predicate this by saying that most MSPs, I don't believe, are like this.
Right.
But there are some that offer advisory services. They even call it sometimes virtual CISO. That is on the outside supposed to fill that gap that you're just talking about. SMBs, they don't have the skill set to realize what it is they want. But if you've got it coming from the same company that's providing the services, there's really not any independent checking there. So how do you know? Now, I've seen and heard of instances where the MSP will use the virtual CISO as an inside sales. It's like, you have a problem with logging, you should be logging this stuff. Oh, by the way, we have a SIM that costs you another $10,000 a month, but it's a good thing. And we'll run it all for you. And you're right, there's that trust. Now, again, I predicate that by saying not all MSPs are like that. Most aren't.
I agree.
But that is an issue. And at the very least, I have been a proponent that the MSP needs to be completely transparent about what they're doing in their advisory service, and that they don't require, if they have the advisory service, they don't require that if there's a gap that they use the MSP solution in order to fill that gap.
100% agree. And I will say that it's probably a small number of MSPs, right, that really have that thing, but it's really just an integrity issue. And honestly, I think MSPs that run into organizations, even if they're small, but you have a strong IT presence, even if it's a small team, it's still a lot harder for them to pull stuff like that. I think it's an accountability thing where it's only when they recognize that there's a weakness within the organization, they're like, there's no one here that could really recognize it, right? But I've seen companies that have gone, 3 years with an MSP with no reports, no understanding of what their assets are, how they're being managed. It's literally radio silence. And that to me is tragic. So if you have an audit, the MSP can't produce anything for you to even help you with like audit attestation or controls, right? So that's another problem. But a lot of executives, depending on your industry, you don't really have a strong technical background. It's a business background or medical, right? For healthcare industries, it's their expertise is in medical or finance or something like that. So if you don't have a strong IT or security presence within your organization, these situations tend to show up a lot more often, but it's opportunistic. Really, is what it is.
So they don't have the skill set to ask the questions.
Yes, that is exactly what I'm trying to say right there.
And they then have, if you'll excuse the horrible pun, a false sense of security, because they're like, we have an MSP, they're taking care of it completely. We're fine, we're safe. Well, there's been some talk in the media recently about MSPs that are getting hit, and there's been more focus now on MSPs about their liability. And it would be unfortunate if you happen to be that SMB that gets caught in MSPs. Too many acronyms.
Alphabet soup, right?
Alphabet soup in their failings, but now your group, the Charles Technology Group, you do work with SMBs
Yes.
in this sort of area. So
Yes.
this is not just you thinking about it, but you've actually seen this happen. Right?
I've seen it, and I'm a big advocate. I think the difference between my brand and like, because technically I am a service provider of some sort, right? Whether it's strategic or otherwise, right? But part of my agreements are I don't do long-term indefinite contracts. I allow any of my clients to opt out quarterly, right? So it's not a hostage situation. It's really no long-term commitments. We have to get remarried every 3 months. if you'd like to, right? Or you at least can get out of it every 3 months, no penalties. And one of the things that I almost mandate as a part of my service is every year we have to allocate a little bit of the funds that you would allocate otherwise to me to an independent third party to come and basically check the advisor, right? So that's a part of my agreement is you must bring in an independent third party. So if you're healthcare, I always advise the executives to chat with your circle, right? Other healthcare organizations in the area and see who they use. I will not go out and choose anyone that I'm affiliated with. It has to be basically a blind evaluation where they don't know me, I don't know them, so that it can really, it's both of us are working for the company, but their job is to make sure I'm not, having integrity issues with my services being provided.
Sounds like that you're a strong evangelist for the three lines of defense.
Yes.
And I completely agree with you on that. And sometimes that's a good place to start with SMBs. It sounds like that's what you're doing to explain this, why the separation of duties between first and second line, which would be the MSP technical side, and then the advisory service, and then second and third line, which would be like the you and the me's of the world, and the audit. And that's one of the things that the audit in and of itself is a different discipline and requires a different skill set. But I like to joke. It's like first line operational management, second line risk management, us, and then third line is audit, which keeps first and second line honest, which is really true, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, 100%.
So when you first start working with an SMB and you kind of get your spidey sense tingling that, all right, they've got this MSSP contract going on. There's something, I'm not getting reports from them. How do you, well, I guess by the fact that they've already reached out to you, that's a big plus for them to begin with. But how do you explain this potential conundrum to them?
So, first off, to make sure there's no misunderstanding on what's supposed to be provided by the MSP, right? I'll ask to review all the contracts, any SOWs, right? Statements of work that might have been signed, whatever caused them to get into this relationship, right? Because the first thing I'd like to do is understand what you're paying for, because I don't want to go in blaming them for not doing things, even if it should have been included in the contract. If it's not there, it's not there, right? And it's just a business decision at that point. So for me, I always start with understanding all of the relationships that they have by getting a hold of the contracts and statements of works. And I review that to understand exactly what's being provided. And then I'll often ask for permission to meet directly with the MSP on behalf of the organization and kind of do my own little assessment of, are they strong in the areas that they're selling, right? Are you a competent company for the things that you sold the client that contacted me? I want to talk to you a little bit. And like I said, the journey is important because throughout my career, I've had the fortunate event, I think, of doing a lot of different things for a lot of different industries. So networking, systems engineering, systems administration, all of the above. The only thing I'm not strong in is programming, like writing full-blown Java code. But everything else, I'd be a one-man wrecking crew. But so I have the competence, the strong foundation in a lot of these areas that will allow me to go to an MSP and talk shop across the entire contract to see where they're falling short, or they might be knocking it out of the park, So that's kind of how I attack that scenario to get myself comfortable with the environment.
And once again, not to go backwards too far, but like we said earlier, a fundamental grounding in IT is so important, because you wouldn't be able to do that if you had just jumped into cyber and
Right.
you started red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming, plaid teaming, whatever they call it nowadays. Sometimes in my day, it's like we called it troubleshooting. I
Right.
mean, it's like, okay, do we have any vulnerabilities? Let me scan against this to see what's happening. Okay. Do we have an issue of someone coming in? How are we going to defend it? Okay, it's troubleshooting. It's like
I have a saying. What do you call security without context?
yeah, I mean, what do you call it?
Luck. Right? There's no real way, without context. I think you can't really secure something, right? Because every vertical in IT has its own security aspect. There's network security. If you're a professional, really I should be the auditor as a security guy, but you should be trained to harden that firewall at implementation. You should be trained to harden that server as a
Yes.
systems engineer, right? At implementation. So, guys who get paid big bucks to deliver 200 servers, but they created 1 million vulnerabilities, in my opinion, that's not a professional. I could do that without being trained. I could spin up some servers without hardening at all, but all I really did was created risk. I just sold you risk.
And that's such a big problem in the industry. It's just like there's so many people who have gotten in who are not looking at it as the big picture like that. I got to ask you one question, since we're talking about security and defining it and all of that. I've never been a big fan of the term cybersecurity,
Right.
because my inherent question is, maybe you can answer this for me. What's a cyber?
IT, right? I mean, I guess anything, because really, I mean, cybersecurity is related to all things. I think electronics, right?
Right.
You can, so I mean, but that's also IT in itself. Information technology is also the electronics that allow you to do transmissions and receiving, right? Transmitting and receiving information.
Now,
So,
see, and I understand that, because when you say information technology security, what are you talking about? You're talking about securing information technology. When you talk
right.
about information security, what are you talking about? You're talking about securing
Yes,
information.
yes,
When you're talking
correct.
about cybersecurity, you're talking about securing your cybers that you have laying around. I don't know. Is this a cyber here? It's like, so
This,
it's.
is this a cyber, right? Like, a owner, is this a cyber? So, yes, I agree.
Was that a toner?
Yeah.
Ah,
It's been here. I'm gonna be honest. It's been here for probably years because I haven't traced the network throughout my house, a cable in my home for at least 2 years. So I don't know. It was just something that I saw in the webcam there.
my goodness, it's like I still have my old toner from my. I shouldn't admit this because I forgot to return it to the University of Buffalo. I think the statute of limitations are out, but I didn't. I forgot to return it when I left them 29 years ago. So UB, I'm sorry if you're hearing this right now. Send me a bill and I'll gladly pay for it, minus depreciation, of course, on it, and the fact that I'm
5 bucks
obviously working it with $5. I'll send you
with
$5.
interest, right?
Well, it's one of the things that I could definitely go down many other paths right now. I'm totally enjoying this conversation, but unfortunately, I don't have the luxury to do that. But I will ask you this. It's like being in cyber, whatever that means, being in information security, and being an entrepreneur, running your own business as well, and certainly having been in the service beforehand. There's a lot of different stressors that are coming at you at all different angles. Um, and I know that you said, I love the terminology. You said something along the lines of that you have a high burnout threshold, but the regardless is like whether or not someone has a low or medium or a high there. We never want to hit that, and we never,
Yes.
because once we burn out, then bad things happen. And one of the things that I'm a proponent of is reminding folks that, hey, step away from information security, IT security, cybersecurity, whatever your term of du jour is, and just do something to round yourself out and decompress, or do a lot of things, live life basically. Well, what's one of the things you do to get away from it all and decompress?
Really, I've found that for myself, a lot of our lives, in technology, are spent in front of the screen. So when I really crave that separation, my favorite thing to do is to go and camp out in the mountains. Right. Luckily, I'm in Utah. We have a lot of beautiful scenery. Right. A lot of good mountains to go and hike into and set up camp. I have to spend at least a night or two outside in the woods. It was just me, my tent, some good friends, and a campfire, right? And just kind of be one with nature. That's kind of what I've found a lot of peace, and it really helps me to reset and hit the ground running when I get back to work. So
I think it is the I want to say it's the Japanese that call that, what, forest diving or something like that.
something like that.
But it's basically, yes, you're immersing yourself within nature, and you do get some good feeds off of that. I totally agree. I mean, sometimes just going for a walk in the woods is just,
Yeah.
you totally reset. Stanley, what things do you have planned coming up?
Honestly, it's just to deliver quality at both places of work. So in my personal life, in my professional occupation, just to continue delivering quality and grow. And I kind of just like to let the universe bring me on my course. I know I don't have that much control over where I end up or how I get there. So for me, it's just to continue working on delivering quality, staying true to yourself, stay developing your craft, right? Do something that you're passionate about. So for me, whatever that looks like is where I'm going to go. But really, it's all about staying true to delivering a good product, no matter what that product is, ultimately. So whatever I'll be doing in the future, hopefully I'm doing it with quality.
That's awesome. Stanley, it's been a wonderful chat. Like I said, it could go on for a lot longer. Love your approach to things. And again, part of that is because I'm probably biased because it seems like our careers like mirrored a lot there, but absolutely appreciate you, of course, also stepping in actually and filling a slot where we had a last minute cancellation. So I really appreciate you doing that as well.
Thank you for having me.
And everybody, stay secure.